rifle report cracked through the Montana night like thunder in a cloudless sky. Through her scope, the 45-year-old woman watched dispassionately as the Russian assassin toppled backward, a neat hole between his eyes, leaking crimson onto the rocky soil. His weapon, seconds ago pressed against a wounded Navy SEAL's temple, clattered uselessly beside him. Americans always send boys to die, the Russian had said moments earlier, his Moscow-accented English carrying across the valley. Not this time, Sokolov. The woman whispered, her voice lost in the vast emptiness of the Montana wilderness. She was already moving before the Russian's body settled into the dust, breaking down her rifle with practiced efficiency. The SVD Dragunov, a trophy from an old mission in East Berlin, disappeared piece by piece into her weathered backpack. The wounded SEAL would need immediate medical attention, but approaching him now would compromise her cover. Better to remain a ghost. The shadow that had just saved his life without being seen. A vibration from her secure satellite phone interrupted her thoughts. The incoming message was brief. Overlook Valley. Unit 113 confirmed. Harrison compromised. Her blue eyes hardened as she read the message twice, then deleted it. So it was true. Colonel Raymond Harrison, XO of Forward Operating Base Horizon, was a traitor. Her suspicions, dismissed for months by her superiors as paranoia, had been correct. General Hartman's words from 7 years ago echoed in her mind. The most dangerous thing in the Montana training grounds isn't the environment, but the secrets we buried there during the Cold War. Tonight, those secrets would begin to unravel as the woman known in classified files only as Phantom 12, the woman who officially didn't exist, entered the Viper Valley. Lieutenant Colonel Olivia Ghost Morgan had one mission: find the truth, no matter the cost. The Black Hawk helicopter descended through the thin mountain air, its rhythmic thump, thump, thump eerily reminiscent of a failing heartbeat. Below, Forward Operating Base Horizon sprawled across the harsh landscape, prefabricated buildings, concrete barriers, and razor wire forming an American island in this ancient, unforgiving terrain. The war games in Montana were supposed to be routine training. The SEAL teams had been running exercises in Viper Valley for months. Victory had been declared in Washington briefings beneath portraits of presidents who'd never seen combat. But not here. Not at FOB Horizon. The helicopter touched down, kicking up swirls of dust that momentarily shrouded the 4 flag-draped bodies being unloaded. 4 more SEALs who would never see home again. 4 more letters that commanding officers would write to families back in America, in small towns with main streets where yellow ribbons still adorned oak trees. Lieutenant Michael Iron Mike Harrington stood motionless as the bodies passed. At 43, his weathered face had seen more war than most generals twice his age. The long scar running from his right eye to the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, the only visible reaction to the procession. His eyes, once sharp, now appeared hollow, as if part of him had died in that valley too. 3 days ago, Harrington had led 12 men from SEAL Team Alpha into Viper Valley. Only he had made it back alive. He still heard their screams at night. Elite warriors reduced to confused, frightened men as something invisible scrambled their senses and judgment. He'd watched as operators who could navigate by stars lost all sense of direction. As marksmen who could hit targets at 1,000 meters couldn't aim straight. As brothers in arms fell to precise enemy fire, they never knew what hit them. He had reported in the debriefing, voice flat, mechanical, perfect ambush, multiple firing positions. Professional, not standard up for tactics, nothing like our previous training scenarios. Colonel Richard Davidson, base commander, approached Harrington after the bodies had been taken to the makeshift morgue. Davidson was old-school Army West Point, with silver at his temples and the straight posture of a man who believed in America when the Star-Spangled Banner played. Pentagon sending someone, Davidson said, keeping his voice low. Combat Effectiveness Assessment Specialist. Direct from Washington. Harrington's jaw tightened. Assessment Specialist. 8 good men dead in a week. 2 more still missing, and they send a pencil pusher to count bullets. Orders came from the bomb. The Viper Valley situation has their attention now. 3 SEAL teams decimated in 6 months. They want answers. They should be sending more men, not analysts, Harrington said, watching as the helicopter lifted off, already empty of its grim cargo and preparing to return. She lands in 20 minutes, Davidson replied. Another bird coming in from Malmstrom. Harrington's eyebrows raised slightly. Davidson nodded once, then turned to leave. Lieutenant, I know what you're thinking. Just remember we all serve in different ways. As Davidson walked away, Harrington felt the weight of a folded paper in his pocket. A letter to the parents of Chief Petty Officer Marcus Jensen, killed 3 days ago. The letter contained the official lies. Died heroically. Sacrifice for freedom. It said nothing of Jensen's confusion as he walked straight into enemy fire. Nothing of how Harrington had been forced to leave his body behind. In the distance, the jagged mountains rose like teeth against the sky. Somewhere in those peaks lay Viper Valley, a natural bowl surrounded by steep cliffs, accessible through only 3 narrow passes. Perfect terrain for an ambush. Perfect terrain for a massacre. Perfect terrain for burying secrets that should have died with the Soviet Union. Unnoticed by Harrington, Colonel Harrison watched the exchange from the shadows of the communications tent. His face betrayed no emotion even as his mind raced. Picking up a secure phone, he punched in a series of numbers from memory. "The Pentagon specialist arrives within the hour," he said quietly in fluent Russian. "It's her, Blackwood from Boston." The voice that replied was calm, cultured, with the faintest hint of Moscow. "Are you certain? Positive?" "What are my orders?" "Maintain your cover, Colonel. Let her investigate. We need to know what she knows." Harrison hesitated. "And if she discovers, then she will join the others in the farthing," the voice interrupted, "as she should have in Boston." Harrison's eyes flickered toward the mountains. For a moment, something like doubt crossed his features. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask of a man who had made his choice long ago. The second helicopter's approach brought most of the base's activity to a temporary halt. Soldiers paused in their duties, some openly curious, others pretending indifference while stealing glances at the landing pad. The Black Hawk settled onto the landing zone, its rotors continuing to spin as a single passenger disembarked. Those expecting an imposing figure in crisp military dress were immediately disappointed. Lieutenant Colonel Olivia Ghost Morgan moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had spent too many hours in aircraft seats. 45 years old, she was neither tall nor short, neither beautiful nor plain, the kind of face that blended into crowds that didn't stick in memory. Her brown hair was pulled back into a practical bun, and she wore standard-issue desert fatigues with lieutenant colonel insignia. The only luggage she carried was a weathered backpack and a manila folder tucked under her arm. But there was something about her eyes. Piercing blue, they scanned the base with an intensity that seemed to catalog every detail, every person, every potential threat. These were not the eyes of a desk analyst. These were the eyes of someone who had seen the worst humanity could offer and had survived to remember every detail. As she walked away from the helicopter, those watching might have noticed other small inconsistencies. The way she moved with her weight perfectly balanced, ready to shift in any direction. How her steps made almost no sound despite the gravel underfoot. The careful way she favored her left side, suggesting an old injury professionally managed. Boston 2015. A warehouse filled with experimental weapons. The searing pain as something broke inside her when the beam fell. The Russian scientist smiling as he escaped into the night. Morgan pushed the memory away. 7 years ago, another life. Staff Sergeant Miller, a young communications specialist, leaned toward his buddy. "That's who they sent to fix this clusterfuck. Some middle-aged paper pusher." His friend shrugged. "Probably just another PowerPoint ranger here to tell us how we're fighting wrong." From nearby, Master Sergeant James Cooper, a 56-year-old veteran with silver hair and 3 tours in Vietnam, watched Morgan with narrowed eyes. Unlike the younger soldiers, Cooper's expression showed no contempt, only growing recognition, followed by something approaching fear. "Jesus Christ," he whispered so quietly that only he could hear. "It can't be." Cooper turned abruptly and walked away, his face pale as winter snow. As he passed the communications tent, one of the younger soldiers heard him mutter, "She died in Detroit. I saw it happen." Colonel Davidson met Morgan at the edge of the landing zone, offering a formal salute, which she returned with precision. "Lieutenant Colonel Morgan, welcome to Phobie Horizon," Davidson said, raising his voice over the sound of the departing helicopter. "I trust your flight was uneventful." "As uneventful as flying through Montana wilderness can be, Colonel," Morgan replied, her voice surprisingly soft but carrying an undertone of steel. "I'd like to see your Tactical Operations Center immediately. I understand you have men missing in Viper Valley." Davidson blinked, clearly surprised by her directness. "Yes, ma'am. 2 SEAL operators, Ramirez and Collins, missing for 72 hours now. We were planning a rescue operation, but after the last incident, show me everything you have. Maps after action reports, communications logs. And I want to speak with your surviving SEAL commander. That would be Lieutenant Harrington. He's expecting you. Davidson hesitated. I should warn you he's not in the best frame of mind. Lost most of his men 3 days ago. Morgan's expression softened momentarily. I understand, Colonel. I've written my share of condolence letters. Something flickered across her face, a shadow of old pain quickly suppressed. Let's not waste time. The odds of finding your men alive decrease with every hour. As they walked toward the command center, none of the soldiers noticed how Morgan's eyes constantly scanned the base perimeter, how she mentally noted firing positions and evacuation routes, how she spotted the 3 snipers positioned on the rooftops that weren't mentioned in any briefing she'd received. None of them except perhaps Master Sergeant Cooper, who watched from the shadows of the supply tent, his expression a mixture of awe and dread. The woman who doesn't exist, he whispered to himself. God help us all. The Tactical Operations Center was a converted shipping container in the center of the base. Its interior walls were covered with maps, satellite imagery, and combat status boards. The air inside was stale and carried the distinct smell of too many soldiers working too many hours on too little sleep. Lieutenant Harrington stood with his back to the door, hunched over a topographical map of Viper Valley. Beside him, Master Sergeant Ray Doc Sullivan, the team's 56-year-old medic in Harrington's right hand, was marking positions with red pins. Sullivan had joined the Army during Vietnam, served as a combat medic with the 101st Airborne, and seen the fall of Saigon firsthand. He'd spent the years since trying to save more lives than the war had claimed, his steady hands and unflappable demeanor making him a legend among Special Operations Forces. Lieutenant Harrington, Colonel Davidson announced, "This is Lieutenant Colonel Morgan from the Pentagon. She's here to assess the Viper Valley situation." Harrington turned slowly, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep swept over Morgan with unconcealed skepticism. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the rough edge of recent grief, "we don't need an assessment. We need more men, better intelligence, and air support that doesn't take 40 minutes to arrive." Sullivan shot Harrington a warning glance before offering Morgan a respectful nod. "What the lieutenant means is that we've been operating under difficult circumstances." "I know exactly what the lieutenant means, Sergeant," Morgan replied, setting her folder on the table. "And I'm not here to second-guess your tactical decisions or count spent shell casings." She moved to the map, studying it with the practiced eye of someone who had spent a lifetime reading terrain. "Tell me about the valley, not what's in the reports, what you know from being there." Harrington's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if chewing on words he couldn't spit out. Finally, he pointed to the map. "Viper Valley is a natural kill box. A valley about 2 kilometers long, 1 wide, surrounded by ridges that give perfect firing positions. 3 entrance points, here, here, and here." His finger jabbed at the map. "All narrow, all easily defended." "Up for?" Morgan asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Not likely," Sullivan interjected. "The tactics were wrong, too professional, no wasted ammunition, no wild firing. Whoever hit us knew exactly what they were doing. They let us get halfway into the valley." Harrington continued, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "Then they opened up from at least 12 different positions. Coordinated, professional. My men never had a chance." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Morgan's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes reflected understanding. Not the abstract sympathy of a desk officer, but the knowledge of someone who had lost men under her command. Boston 2015. The screams of her team as the ambush unfolded. The sickly sweet smell in the air. The confusion as trained operators became disoriented. The face of Alexei Baronov watching from the ridgeline as her world fell apart. "How many SEAL teams have gone into Viper Valley before yours?" she asked, pushing away the memory. 3, Sullivan answered when Harrington didn't. 37 men total, 24 dead, 11 wounded, and now Ramirez and Collins missing. "Presumed captured," Harrington added bitterly, "probably being tortured for information as we stand here talking." Morgan nodded slowly, then asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "What happens to the wind patterns in the valley throughout the day? The thermal currents?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Davidson looked confused. Sullivan raised an eyebrow, but Harrington's expression changed to one of careful reassessment. The valley creates its own microclimate, he said slowly. Cold air sinks at night, creating a downward current. During the day, the sun heats the valley floor, pushing air upward along the ridges. And sound, Morgan pressed, distorted, echoes from the rock faces. Sometimes you hear gunfire but can't tell where it's coming from. Morgan nodded, then began examining the positions marked on the map where SEAL teams had been attacked. Her finger traced patterns that were not immediately obvious to the others. These aren't random ambush points, she said quietly, almost to herself. Their positions are specifically designed to take advantage of the valley's acoustics and wind patterns. Harrington's eyes narrowed. How would you know that? Instead of answering, Morgan pulled a notebook from her pocket and began sketching what appeared to be airflow and sound propagation models of the valley, the kind of analysis that combat meteorologists might prepare, not administrative personnel. Sullivan watched her work with growing curiosity. This was not the behavior of someone sent to count casualties and file efficiency reports. The tension in the room was broken when Morgan discreetly reached into her jacket pocket and removed a small, worn leather wallet. As she set it down to continue her notes, it fell open just enough for Harrington to glimpse an old photograph. A group of women and men in civilian clothes standing before an unmarked building. In the corner, barely visible, were the words, Phantom Echo 2010, written in faded ink. Morgan quickly closed the wallet when she noticed Harrington's gaze, but not before a flash of something vulnerability perhaps crossed her face. I need all your after-action reports, she said, her professional demeanor instantly restored. Every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem, and I want to speak with anyone who has entered that valley and survived. That would be me and 7 others, Harrington said flatly, 2 of whom are still in the medical tent with injuries. Then we'll start with you, Lieutenant, Morgan said, holding his gaze. Tell me everything, not just what happened. Tell me what you felt, what you sensed. Sometimes our subconscious registers threats our conscious mind doesn't process. For the first time since her arrival, Harrington's hostility seemed to waver. He recognized the approach not of an administrator, but of an operator, debriefing another operator. Who are you really then? He asked quietly. Morgan's blue eyes revealed nothing. Someone who wants to bring your men home, Lieutenant? Isn't that enough for now? As they continued reviewing the data, the door to the TOC opened, and Colonel Harrison entered, his appearance immaculate despite the late hour. Colonel Morgan, he said with practiced cordiality. Welcome to Phobe Horizon. I trust Colonel Davidson has been providing everything you need. Morgan turned, and for a split second, Harrington caught something in her eyes, a flash of recognition quickly masked. Colonel Harrison, she acknowledged with a precise nod. Yes, your staff has been most accommodating. Excellent. I'd like to offer my personal assistance with your investigation. As XO, I've been closely involved with all operations in Viper Valley. Thank you, Colonel. I may take you up on that offer. For now, I'd appreciate access to the communications logs for the past 3 months, all transmissions to and from teams operating in the valley. If Harrison was disturbed by this request, he didn't show it. Of course, I'll have them prepared immediately. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Colonel, the rescue operation for Ramirez and Collins is scheduled for Borough 500 tomorrow. Given your expertise, perhaps you'd like to observe. I'd like to do more than observe, Colonel, Morgan replied. With your permission, I'd like to accompany the team into the valley. Harrison's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. That's a rather unconventional request, but these are unconventional circumstances. I'll discuss it with Colonel Davidson. After Harrison left, Harrington turned to Morgan with renewed suspicion. You know him. It wasn't a question. We've never met, Morgan replied carefully. But you recognized him, Harrington pressed. Morgan held his gaze for a long moment before answering. Let's just say his reputation precedes him. What reputation is that exactly? Instead of answering directly, Morgan changed tactics. Tell me, Lieutenant, has Colonel Harrison been involved in planning all the previous missions into Viper Valley? Of course, Harrington replied. He's the XO. Nothing happens on this base without his knowledge. And has he ever accompanied any of the teams himself? No, command staff doesn't typically participate in field operations. Yet he knew exactly where to find your team when things went wrong, didn't he? He was the one who coordinated the extraction. Harrington's expression darkened as he began to understand the implication. Are you suggesting Harrison had something to do with what happened to my men? I'm not suggesting anything yet, Lieutenant, Morgan replied, keeping her voice low. I'm gathering information. But I find it interesting that 3 SEAL teams have been ambushed in exactly the same way using the same tactics, and the only common factor in the planning of all 3 operations is Colonel Harrison. Sullivan, who had been listening intently, spoke up. That's a serious accusation. Colonel Harrison's been with this unit for years. Distinguished service record. Why would he suddenly turn money, ideology, blackmail? Morgan shrugged. There are many reasons why people betray their country, Sergeant. The why matters less than the if. Harrington studied Morgan with new eyes, his earlier skepticism transforming into something more complex. You didn't come here to assess our combat effectiveness, did you? You came here looking for a traitor. Morgan neither confirmed nor denied this. Instead, she gathered her notes and stood. I think I've taken enough of your time for now, gentlemen. Lieutenant, I'd like to interview the wounded operators in the morning before the rescue operation, and I'll need to examine any equipment recovered from the previous missions. You haven't answered my question, Harrington said, also standing. No, Morgan agreed. I haven't. After she left, Sullivan turned to Harrington, his expression troubled. What do you make of her, Mike? Harrington stared at the door through which Morgan had departed. I don't know, Doc, but I'm starting to think, there's a lot more going on in that valley than we've been told. The medical tent was quiet in the pre-dawn hours, the only sounds the soft beeping of monitoring equipment and the occasional groan from wounded men trying to find comfort on narrow cots. Morgan moved silently between the rows, following the lead of a young medic who had been instructed to grant her access. They stopped beside a bed where a muscular man in his 30s lay with bandages covering much of his torso. Despite his injuries, his eyes were alert and watchful as Morgan approached. Petty Officer Reynolds, the medic introduced in a hushed voice. He was with Lieutenant Harrington's team, had rear security. Morgan nodded her thanks to the medic, who retreated to give them privacy. She pulled up a folding chair beside Reynolds' bed. How are you feeling, Petty Officer? She asked, her voice gentle but direct. Reynolds studied her through narrowed eyes. Who's asking, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan? I'm investigating what happened in Viper Valley. Another investigation, Reynolds snorted weakly. That makes what 4-5 nobody believes what we're telling them anyway. I believe you, Morgan said simply. Something in her tone made Reynolds look at her more carefully. You do, don't you? Tell me about the smell. Reynolds stiffened, surprise flashing across his face. How did you... Just tell me. He swallowed hard, the memory clearly disturbing. Sweet, like almonds, but wrong somehow. I noticed it just before everything went to hell. Thought it was just the local plants or something. Then what happened? The guys started acting strange, disoriented, paranoid. Johnson thought we were being followed, but there was nobody there. Martinez couldn't read his compass, kept turning in circles. And me? He hesitated. I got scared. Not normal combat scared. I mean terrified, like when I was a kid and thought there were monsters under my bed. Couldn't move, couldn't think, just frozen. And that's when the shooting started. Yeah, from everywhere at once. Perfect ambush. His voice dropped lower. But the weird thing is, some of the guys, they just walked right into it. Like they didn't even see the danger. Like they were sleepwalking. Morgan nodded, making notes. Did you report the smell in your debriefing? Yeah, fat lot of good it did. The intelligence officer looked at me like I was crazy. Said it was probably just stress affecting my senses. And Colonel Harrison, was he present for your debriefing? A shadow crossed Reynolds' face. Yeah, he was the one who suggested I might need psychological evaluation. Like I was making it up or something. One more question, Petty Officer. Did anyone examine your equipment after you returned your uniform, your gear? Reynolds thought for a moment. Yeah, actually, Harrison had the NBC team check everything. Said it was standard protocol after encountering unknown environmental factors. Morgan made a final note, then stood. Thank you, Petty Officer. You've been very helpful. Colonel, Reynolds called as she turned to leave. You know what happened out there, don't you? What that smell was? Morgan paused. I have a theory, but I need more evidence before I can be certain. Will you tell us when you know for sure we deserve that much? Yes, she promised. You do. Outside the medical tent, Morgan found Harrington waiting, his face grim in the pre-dawn light. Learn anything useful? He asked without preamble. Perhaps, she replied. Your men mentioned a sweet smell just before they began experiencing disorientation. I noticed it too. Like almonds, but off somehow. I reported it, but let me guess. Harrison suggested it was just local vegetation. Harrington's eyes narrowed. How did you know that? Because that's what they always say. Morgan stared out at the mountains barely visible in the dim light. Lieutenant, I need to level with you. I believe your men were exposed to a chemical agent, something designed to affect cognitive function, spatial awareness, and threat assessment. A chemical weapon in Montana, that makes no sense. It does if you know what to look for. She turned to face him fully. I believe what happened to your team, what happened to all the teams sent into that valley was a field test for a next-generation incapacitating agent. One that doesn't kill its targets, but renders them incapable of effective resistance. Who, Harrington demanded, who would do this? Someone with far more sophisticated resources and a much longer history in chemical weapons development. Someone who has been perfecting this particular compound for over a decade. Before she could continue, they were interrupted by the arrival of Sullivan, fully geared up for the upcoming rescue operation. Lieutenant Colonel, he greeted them. The team's assembled and ready for final briefing. O500 is approaching fast. Harrington nodded. We'll be right there, Doc. He turned back to Morgan. This conversation isn't over, Colonel. No, she agreed. It's just beginning. As they walked toward the operations area where the rescue team was gathering, Morgan spotted Master Sergeant Cooper, watching from the shadows of the supply tent. Their eyes met briefly, and Cooper gave an almost imperceptible nod before disappearing inside. I need to check something, Morgan said to Harrington. I'll join you at the briefing in 5 minutes. Without waiting for his response, she changed direction and headed for the supply tent. Inside, Cooper was waiting, his aged face lined with tension. I wondered when you'd come find me, he said quietly. Hello, James, Morgan replied. It's been a long time. Not long enough. Cooper glanced toward the tent entrance to ensure they were alone. They said you died in Detroit. I saw the after-action report myself. Reports can be misleading. So can people, Cooper countered. What are you doing here, Olivia? Or is it still Sarah? It's Morgan now, she corrected him. And I think you know exactly why I'm here. The same reason you've been avoiding me since I arrived. Cooper's shoulders sagged slightly. It's happening again, isn't it, like in Boston? Yes, but this time they've refined it. The compound is more potent, more targeted, and they're using American Special Forces as test subjects. Unit 113, Cooper said, the name barely a whisper. You remember, so how could I forget they killed everyone in your team except you? He paused. And me. And you, Morgan agreed, her tone neutral, but her eyes watchful. Convenient, wasn't it, how you were the only support team member who survived that day? Cooper's face hardened. If you've got something to say, Morgan, say it straight. Someone gave away our position in Boston, James. Someone told Unit 113 exactly where to find us, exactly when we'd be most vulnerable. And you think it was me? Cooper's voice rose slightly. I lost friends that day too. But not your life, and not your career. In fact, you've done quite well for yourself since then. Special assignments, rapid promotions, and now a cushy position at a forward operating base where 3 SEAL teams have mysteriously walked into the exact same trap that killed my team in Boston. Cooper's hand inched toward his sidearm. You're way out of line, Colonel. Am I? Then why did you report seeing me die in Detroit when I've never set foot in Michigan? The only way you could have known to spread that particular lie is if you were in contact with the people who wanted me dead. For a long moment they stood in tense silence, Cooper's hand hovering near his weapon. Morgan outwardly calm but coiled for action. Finally, Cooper's posture changed, a subtle relaxation that somehow made him seem more dangerous rather than less. You always were too smart for your own good, Sarah, he said, using her original name. That's what got your team killed in Boston. That's what's going to get you killed here. So it was you, Morgan said, the confirmation bringing no satisfaction. All these years I wondered who betrayed us. Why money? Cooper laughed softly. You think so small, always did. This isn't about money. It's about the future, about who will control it. By developing weapons that target the mind, that turn soldiers into confused, helpless targets. By developing tools that can end conflicts before they begin, Cooper corrected. Imagine a world where war doesn't mean death, just temporary incapacitation, where entire enemy forces can be neutralized without killing a single person. A beautiful fantasy, Morgan said coldly. But that's not what I saw in Boston. That's not what happened to Harrington's men. I saw trained operators shooting at shadows at each other, walking directly into enemy fire because they couldn't process the danger. Refinement takes time, Cooper shrugged. And test subjects. American test subjects. Your brothers in arms. Cooper's expression hardened. Sacrifices must be made for progress. The Romans understood that. So did von Braun. So did Oppenheimer. And Colonel Harrison, is he a true believer in your cause or just another mercenary? Harrison is a practical man. He understands which way the wind is blowing. Morgan nodded toward the operations area where the rescue team was gathering. And this mission, another sacrifice for progress. For the first time, Cooper smiled a cold, predatory expression. Oh, this mission is special. This one isn't just about testing the compound. It's about you, Sarah. It's about finishing what should have ended in Boston. Baronoff, Morgan said, the name like ice in her mouth. He's there, isn't he, in the valley? Colonel Baronoff has been looking forward to seeing you again, Cooper confirmed. He was most disappointed when you escaped Boston. He's had time to prepare a proper welcome this time. Morgan's mind raced, calculating options, revising plans. And if I don't go on the mission, then Ramirez and Collins die, and you simply wait for another opportunity. But you will go, won't you, because you can't help yourself. Because the great phantom bomb never leaves men behind. Cooper's smile widened. It's what makes you so predictable. Does Harrington know about any of this? Cooper shook his head. Harrington is a good soldier. Follows orders, doesn't ask too many questions. The perfect pawn. You're wrong about him, Morgan said quietly. And you're wrong about me too. Am I? Cooper raised an eyebrow. We'll see, won't we, in the valley. Morgan held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned to leave. At the tent entrance, she paused. One last question, James. That day in Boston, was it worth it betraying your country, your brothers? Could any amount of money or power make that worth it? Cooper's expression flickered a momentary crack in his composure. We make our choices, Sarah. We live with the consequences. Yes, she agreed softly. We do. As she walked away, Cooper watched her go, then reached for his secure phone. The call was answered on the first ring. She knows, he said without preamble. About me, about Harrison, about the operation. As expected, replied the cultured voice that had spoken to Harrison earlier. Is she still planning to join the rescue mission? Yes, despite knowing it's a trap. Excellent. Everything proceeds as planned. Then the voice paused. And Cooper, once this is concluded, your obligation to us is fulfilled. You'll receive your final payment and be free to retire as agreed. Thank you, Colonel Baronoff. Don't thank me yet, Cooper. First, make sure Morgan enters that valley. Make sure she doesn't leave it alive this time. The line went dead, leaving Cooper alone with his thoughts and the weight of his betrayal. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains, illuminating Viper Valley in the distance, a killing ground prepared and waiting for its next victims. The team assembled for the rescue operation was a mix of Harrington's remaining SEALs and additional operators pulled from other units on base. 15 men in total, all combat-hardened veterans, all briefed on the disasters that had befallen previous teams in Viper Valley. Their faces showed determination tinged with the unavoidable edge of concern that comes from knowing you're walking into a situation that has already claimed the lives of your brothers in arms. Colonel Harrison stood at the front of the briefing room outlining the mission parameters with practiced efficiency. Behind him, a large topographical display of Viper Valley highlighted the 3 entry points, suspected enemy positions, and the last known location of Ramirez and Collins. Insertion will be at YO 600 hours through all 3 access points simultaneously, Harrison explained. Alpha team led by Lieutenant Harrington will take the eastern approach. Bravo team under Master Sergeant Sullivan will enter through the southern pass. Charlie team commanded by Lieutenant Thompson will secure the western approach and establish overwatch positions. Morgan sat at the back of the room, studying not just the mission plan, but the reactions of the men as Harrison spoke. Most listened with professional attention, but she noted the subtle signs of unease, the slight shifting of weight, the occasional exchanged glance, the unconscious tightening of grip on equipment. These men knew they were being sent into a meat grinder. They would go because that's what operators did. They accepted the mission, whatever the risk, but they weren't blind to the dangers. Her gaze shifted to Cooper, who stood near the door, his expression unreadable. Their confrontation in the supply tent had confirmed her suspicions, but had also complicated her options. If Cooper was working with Unit 113 with Baronov, then the entire mission was compromised before it began. And yet Ramirez and Collins might still be alive. They might still be recoverable. She couldn't abandon them to their fate even knowing she was walking into a trap. Harrison concluded his briefing and opened the floor for questions. Thompson, a wiry SEAL with a reputation for keen tactical awareness, spoke up first. Sir, with respect, the previous missions all followed standard insertion protocols and all walked into the same trap. Shouldn't we consider an alternative approach? Perhaps a nighttime halo insertion or a ridge infiltration? Harrison frowned slightly. The timeline doesn't allow for those options, Lieutenant. Intelligence suggests Ramirez and Collins are in imminent danger. We need to move now with the assets we have available. Another operator, a sergeant named Wilson, raised his hand. What about air support, sir? Last time the QRF took 40 minutes to reach the team when things went sideways. We'll have 2 Apache gunships on standby, Harrison assured him. Response time should be under 15 minutes. Morgan noted the careful wording, should be not, will be. Another red flag. As the questions continued, Harrington made his way to the back of the room and sat beside Morgan. You look troubled, Colonel, he observed quietly. This mission is being rushed, she replied, keeping her voice low. 15 minutes to plan a rescue operation in terrain that's already claimed 3 SEAL teams. That's not SOP, and you know it. Sometimes rapid response is necessary, and sometimes it's a recipe for disaster. Morgan leaned closer. Lieutenant, I spoke with Master Sergeant Cooper. He confirmed my suspicions. Harrington's eyes narrowed. About Unit 113, about the chemical agent, about Harrison's involvement. She paused. And his own. Cooper Harrington's disbelief was evident in his tone. He's been with the unit for years. Decorated veteran. Why would he? The same reason men like him always turn? Morgan cut him off. Money, power, ideology. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that this mission is compromised from the start. Harrington's jaw tightened as he processed this information. If what you're saying is true, we need to abort, regroup, develop a new plan with people we can trust. And in the meantime, Ramirez and Collins die, Morgan pointed out, if they're not dead already. So what's the alternative? Walk knowingly into a trap. Sometimes the only way out is through, Morgan replied, but we need to change the equation. Give ourselves an edge they're not expecting. What kind of edge? Morgan reached into her pocket and withdrew a small case containing what looked like auto-injectors similar to EpiPens. Protection against their compound. It won't make us immune, but it should reduce the effects significantly enough to maintain combat effectiveness. Harrington stared at the injectors. You came prepared for this. You knew about the chemical agent before you even arrived. I suspected, Morgan corrected. Now I'm certain. How could you possibly know what we'd be facing? Before Morgan could answer, Harrison called the briefing to a close. Final gear check in 15 minutes. Wheels up at 0545, dismissed. As the operators dispersed to make their preparations, Harrison approached Harrington and Morgan. Colonel Davidson has approved your request to accompany the mission, Colonel Morgan, he informed her with professional courtesy. You'll be with Lieutenant Harrington's team, strictly as an observer, of course. Of course, Morgan agreed, her expression revealing nothing. Lieutenant, a word in private, Harrison asked, gesturing Harrington aside. As the 2 men stepped away, Morgan used the opportunity to approach Sullivan, who was checking his medical supplies. Sergeant Sullivan, she greeted him. A moment of your time. Sullivan looked up, his weathered face showing a mixture of respect and wariness. Morgan handed him one of the auto-injectors. I believe your team will encounter a chemical agent in the valley, an incapacitating compound that affects cognitive function. This is a counteragent. It should provide some protection. Sullivan examined the injector with professional interest. Military-grade pharmaceuticals with a custom delivery system. This isn't standard issue anywhere in our armed forces. No, Morgan acknowledged. It's not. And you just happen to have these available. I came prepared, Sergeant. Sullivan studied her face. You knew what we'd be facing. How? Because I've faced it before, Morgan replied simply. In Boston 2015, a Russian special operations unit called Unit 113 was testing an early version of the same compound. They wiped out an entire special operations team. Except you, Sullivan guessed, his perception razor sharp. Except me, Morgan confirmed. I need you to distribute these to your team discreetly. And be careful who you trust, Sergeant. This operation is compromised at the highest levels. Harrison Sullivan's expression darkened. Morgan nodded slightly. And Cooper. To his credit, Sullivan didn't immediately reject this accusation. Instead, he considered it carefully, his mind clearly reviewing past interactions, anomalies, inconsistencies that might suddenly make sense in this new context. That's a heavy accusation, Colonel. I know, and I wouldn't make it without evidence. Sullivan pocketed the injector. What do you need from me? Eyes open, mind sharp. And when things go wrong, because they will be ready to adapt quickly. That's the job description, Sullivan replied with grim humor. Anything else? Yes, when we reach the Valley, watch for a man with silver hair. Russian, about 60, carries himself like career military. Colonel Alexei Baronov, Unit 113's commander. He'll be there, coordinating the operation. And he's after you specifically. Morgan's expression hardened. We have unfinished business from Boston. So, across the room, Harrington was having a very different conversation with Harrison. I'm concerned about Colonel Morgan's involvement in this mission, Harrison was saying. Her behavior since arriving has been erratic, asking unusual questions, making unfounded accusations. What kind of accusations? Harrington asked carefully. She's been suggesting there might be some kind of chemical weapon involved in what happened to your team, even implying that someone on base might be collaborating with enemy forces. Harrison shook his head in apparent concern. I've seen this before with intelligence officers who spend too long in the field. They start seeing conspiracies everywhere. And you think that's what's happening with Morgan? I think she's potentially unstable, Harrison replied. And having an unstable officer on a high-risk mission endangers everyone involved. I tried to express these concerns to Colonel Davidson, but he insists on honoring the Pentagon's directives. Harrington studied Harrison's face, looking for signs of deception. The colonel's concerns seemed genuine, his reasoning sound, and yet Morgan's warnings echoed in his mind. I'll keep an eye on her, Harrington promised, deliberately ambiguous about his intentions. That's all I ask, Harrison said, apparently satisfied. Good hunting, Lieutenant. Bring our boys home. As Harrison walked away, Harrington felt the weight of command settle more heavily on his shoulders. Who could he trust? Morgan, a stranger with wild theories about Russian chemical weapons, or Harrison, a superior officer with years of distinguished service? The answer, he decided, would likely be found in Viper Valley. One way or another, the truth would reveal itself where his men had died. The Black Hawk helicopters roared to life in the early dawn light, their rotors slicing through the thin mountain air. On the tarmac, 15 operators performed final weapons checks, their movements precise and economical. These men had done this hundreds of times before the ritual preparation for a mission where every detail could mean the difference between life and death. Lieutenant Harrington moved among his Team Alpha team, checking equipment and offering brief words of encouragement. His face betrayed none of the doubt that had been gnawing at him since his conversations with Morgan and Harrison. Someone was lying. Someone had betrayed his men. But without conclusive evidence, all he could do was proceed with extreme caution. Morgan stood slightly apart from the group, adjusting her own gear. She had changed from her administrative uniform into more practical, tactical clothing. Dark combat pants, a close-fitting, long-sleeve shirt, and a plate carrier that looked well used. Her hair was now tightly braided, and she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had prepared for combat many times before. Sullivan approached her, his medical kit secured to his belt. Distributed the injectors as requested, he said quietly. Team's ready. Any issues? Sullivan shook his head. Some questions, but I told them it was a new prophylactic against environmental toxins. Standard procedure for the region. Cooper ain't watching us right now from the comm tent, Sullivan replied without turning his head. Hasn't taken his eyes off you since briefing. Morgan nodded slightly. Stay alert, Sergeant. The moment we're in the valley, everything changes. Roger that, Sullivan hesitated, then added. Lieutenant's troubled, caught between your warnings and Harrison's counter-accusations. As he should be, Morgan acknowledged. Healthy skepticism keeps you alive in this business. Harrison emerged from the command center, walking briskly toward the assembled teams. He carried himself with the confidence of a career officer, but Morgan's trained eye caught the subtle tells of a man under stress, the slight tension in his shoulders, the too controlled pace of his walk. Comms check complete, weather conditions optimal, Apache support on standby. Operation is a go, Harrison announced. He moved to Harrington, extending his hand. Good hunting, Lieutenant. Bring our boys home. Harrington accepted the handshake with a curt nod. We'll do our best, sir. I'm sure you will. Harrison's gaze shifted to Morgan. Colonel, a word before departure. Morgan followed Harrison a few steps away from the teams, her posture relaxed but alert. I understand you've been making some unusual claims, Harrison said, his voice low. Allegations about chemical weapons, about compromised personnel. Not allegations, Colonel, observations. Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. The pressure of combat operations affects people differently. Even experienced intelligence officers sometimes see patterns that aren't there. Is that what you told yourself in Boston? Morgan asked quietly. When you sold out that NATO team to Buranov. For a fraction of a second, Harrison's composure cracked, a flash of something cold and dangerous crossing his face before the professional mask returned. I wasn't in Boston, Colonel. I think you're confused. No, you weren't, Morgan agreed. But your fingerprints were all over the intelligence leak that got those operators killed, just like they're all over the missions into Viper Valley. Harrison studied her for a long moment. You know, Colonel, the valley can be dangerous. Accidents happen even to experienced observers. Is that a threat, Colonel? A word of caution, Harrison replied smoothly. The mountains are unforgiving of mistakes. Morgan smiled thinly. On that, we agree. As they rejoined the group, Harrington caught Morgan's eye, a questioning look on his face. She gave him a nearly imperceptible nod, confirmation that his growing suspicions about Harrison were well-founded. The teams loaded onto their respective helicopters, Alpha Team, with Harrington and Morgan in the lead chopper, Bravo Team, with Sullivan in the second, and Charlie Team with Thompson in the third. As the Blackhawks lifted off, banking toward the mountains, Cooper watched from the communications center. He keyed his secure radio. All teams airborne, he reported. Operation proceeding as planned. The cultured voice of Colonel Baronov replied, Excellent. Our teams are in position. The valley awaits its guests. She suspects me, Cooper added. Made direct accusations. As expected, she was always perceptive. Baronov sounded almost admiring. It changes nothing. By sunset, the woman who doesn't exist will truly cease to exist. In the lead helicopter, Morgan checked her weapon one last time, her mind focused on the mission ahead. She had walked into traps before, sometimes by necessity, sometimes by choice. The key was not avoiding the trap, but changing its parameters, turning the hunter into the hunted. Baronov was waiting for her in the valley. After 7 years, they would finally face each other again. The thought should have filled her with dread, but instead she felt a strange calm settle over her. One way or another, their long dance would end today. Beside her, Harrington was briefing his team on last-minute adjustments to their approach. His voice was steady, authoritative, the voice of a man who had led others into combat many times before. Standard operating procedure ends the moment we touch down, he was saying. This isn't a conventional enemy. They're sophisticated, disciplined, and they know we're coming. Stay tight, communicate constantly, and if anyone starts feeling disoriented, anything unusual at all, report it immediately. One of the operators, a young SEAL named Martinez, glanced at Morgan. What exactly are we expecting, sir? The briefing was light on details about what happened to the previous teams. Harrington looked to Morgan, a silent invitation for her to explain. You'll notice a sweet smell like almonds, she said, her voice carrying clearly over the helicopter's engine noise. Shortly after, some of you may experience disorientation, confusion, or irrational fear. The injections Sergeant Sullivan distributed will help mitigate these effects, but they're not a complete defense. Your best protection is awareness. Know that what you're experiencing isn't natural. It's induced. Fight through it. And what kind of enemy has access to that kind of tech? Another operator asked. That's not standard OP4 capability. No, Morgan agreed. It's not. The question hung in the air unanswered as the helicopters approached their drop points. Through the open door, Morgan could see Viper Valley spread out below them, a natural bowl surrounded by jagged peaks, its floor a patchwork of rocky terrain and sparse vegetation. Beautiful in its way and deadly. The pilot's voice came through their headsets. LZ in sight, 2 minutes to touchdown. No visible hostiles. Harrington made a final check of his team. Weapons hot. Stay alert. Trust your training. As the Black Hawk began its descent toward the eastern pass into the valley, Morgan caught Harrington's eye. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "remember, not everything is as it seems. Trust your instincts, not just your eyes." Harrington nodded grimly. "In this business, paranoia is just good situational awareness." The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust, and Alpha Team deployed in practice formation, securing the immediate area as the Black Hawk lifted off again. In the distance, they could hear the other helicopters depositing Bravo and Charlie teams at their designated entry points. For a moment, the valley was eerily quiet, the only sound the fading thump of helicopter rotors. Then Harrington gave the signal, and Alpha Team began their careful advance into Viper Valley and into the trap that awaited them. The eastern pass into Viper Valley was a natural funnel, steep rock walls rising on either side, creating a corridor approximately 30 meters wide that gradually opened onto the valley floor. Alpha Team moved through it in tactical formation weapons, at the ready, every sense heightened to detect potential threats. Morgan stayed close to Harrington, her eyes constantly scanning, not just for enemy combatants, but for the telltale signs of the delivery system for Unit 113's compound. Based on her experience in Boston, they would position it to take advantage of the valley's natural wind patterns, somewhere elevated with clear lines to distribute the aerosolized agent across the maximum area. "Ridgeline 2 o'clock, she said quietly to Harrington. "See that rock formation that looks like a natural chimney? Perfect position for a dispersal device." Harrington studied the indicated spot through his binoculars. "No visible activity, but you're right. Good vantage point, natural concealment." He signaled to one of his operators, a SEAL named Rodriguez. "Keep eyes on that position. Anything moves, I want to know about it." As they continued through the pass, Morgan noticed subtle changes in the terrain, evidence of recent activity, carefully disguised to blend with the natural environment. Boot prints partially erased broken vegetation, small rocks displaced from their weather-worn positions. Someone had moved through here recently, and they had tried to hide their passage. "Alpha Team, this is Bravo Lead." Sullivan's voice came through their comms. "We're through the southern pass, no resistance so far, proceeding to phase line Alpha." "Roger, Bravo Lead," Harrington acknowledged. "Maintain alert status. Alpha Team is approximately 10 minutes from target area." The valley was opening up before them now, its floor a mix of rocky outcroppings, patches of hardy mountain vegetation, and the occasional cluster of wind-twisted trees. In the center, perhaps a kilometer away, stood the ruins of what appeared to be an ancient structure, crumbling stone walls, and the remnants of a tower likely dating back centuries. "The fortress," Morgan said, recognizing it from satellite imagery. "Native American, later used as a trapper outpost in the 18s. Logical place to hold prisoners," Harrington noted. "Defensible position, good sight lines. And likely where they're expecting us to go," Morgan added. "The obvious target." Harrington considered this. "You think it's a diversion? Possibly, or a double bluff. Either way, we need to approach with extreme caution." As they moved further into the valley, Thompson suddenly raised his fist, the signal to halt. The team froze in place, weapons trained outward in a defensive perimeter. "Movement," Thompson whispered, indicating a position to their right where a cluster of boulders provided natural cover. Two figures moving low and slow. Harrington raised his binoculars, focusing on the indicated spot. Through them, he could make out two men in what appeared to be tattered American military uniforms, moving with the awkward gait of the injured or exhausted. "Could be Ramirez and Collins," he said, hope and suspicion warring in his voice. Morgan took the binoculars, studying the figures carefully. "Maybe," she said after a moment, "but their movement pattern is too regular for men who've been held captive for 3 days. No variation in pace, no rest stops." "Bait," Harrington concluded grimly, "most likely designed to draw us into the open." Harrington keyed his radio. "All teams, this is Alpha. We have visual on what might be our missing personnel, but be advised it could be a trap. Bravo Team continue to phase line Alpha. Charlie Team maintain overwatch positions and report any unusual activity." "Copy that, Alpha Lead," came Thompson's reply from Charlie Team. "We've established overwatch on the western ridge. Good visibility of the valley floor. No hostile activity observed yet." Sullivan's acknowledgement followed. "Bravo Team proceeding as ordered. ETA to phase line Alpha 3 minutes." Harrington turned to his team. "We're going to maintain position here and observe. Rodriguez, you and Wilson set up a sniper hide with clear lines on those two figures. The rest of you establish a defensive perimeter." Nobody moves without my direct order. As the team deployed as instructed, Harrington pulled Morgan aside. What's your assessment? If those aren't our men, where are Ramirez and Collins? If they're still alive, they're likely being held in a secondary location, Morgan replied. Somewhere less obvious than the fortress. Unit 113 operates on layers of deception. The obvious target is rarely the real one. You seem to know a lot about their tactics. I should. I've been hunting them for 7 years. Morgan's eyes scanned the valley with professional intensity. After Boston, I made it my mission to understand everything about how they operate, their preferences, their patterns, their weaknesses. And what is their weakness? Harrington asked. Arrogance, Morgan said without hesitation. They're so confident in their superior training and technology that they sometimes overlook the simplest countermeasures. In Boston, I survived because I held my breath when I noticed the almond smell. Sometimes the oldest tricks are the most effective. Their conversation was interrupted by Thompson's voice over the radio, tight with controlled urgency. Alpha Lead, this is Charlie Overwatch. We've got movement on the northern ridge. Multiple figures setting up what looks like crew-served weapons. Can you identify? Harrington asked. Negative. Distance is too great for positive ID, but they're not dressed like standard offer. More like professional military. Disciplined movements, proper spacing. Harrington and Morgan exchanged glances. Unit 113, she said quietly. Charlie Overwatch, maintain visual but do not engage, Harrington ordered. I repeat, do not engage unless fired upon. Copy that. Wait. Thompson's voice cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of gunfire in the background. Charlie team report, Harrington called urgently. After a tense moment, Thompson's voice returned breathless and strained. Taking fire from multiple positions. Johnson's hit. We're pinned down. Hang tight. We're coming to you, Harrington replied, already signaling his team to move. Bravo team divert to support Charlie. We'll approach from the east flank. As Alpha team prepared to move out, Morgan grabbed Harrington's arm. Wait, this is exactly what they want to split our forces, create chaos. I'm not leaving my men to die, Harrington said firmly. I'm not suggesting that, but we need to be smart about this. Morgan pointed to the map. Send half your team to support Charlie. You and I will continue toward those two figures with the rest. If they are Ramirez and Collins, this might be our only chance to extract them, while Unit 113 is occupied with Charlie team. Harrington considered this quickly, then nodded. Rodriguez, take Wilson, Martinez, and Jackson. Link up with Bravo team and provide support to Charlie. The rest of you with me and the Colonel. As Rodriguez led his detachment toward the western ridge, Harrington, Morgan, and the remaining 3 operators of Alpha Team moved cautiously toward the 2 figures they had spotted earlier. The men had now stopped moving and appeared to be resting beside a fallen stone column, a piece of the ancient fortress that had somehow been displaced from the main structure. Something's not right, one of the SEALs, a veteran operator named Parker, muttered. Why would they stop there? No cover, no concealment. It's like they want to be seen. Because they do, Morgan confirmed quietly. Stay alert for the almond smell. The moment anyone detects it, put on your masks. They were within 200 meters of the figures when the first shots rang out, not aimed at them, but at Charlie team on the western ridge. The sharp crack of precision rifles echoed across the valley, followed by the heavier sound of machine gun fire. Charlie team report status, Harrington called into his radio. Thompson's voice came back, nearly drowned out by the sound of combat. Multiple shooters, highly coordinated. Martinez is down. We're falling back to secondary positions. Sullivan's voice joined the channel. Bravo team is taking fire as well. They've got us bracketed from the northern and eastern ridges. The trap had been sprung exactly as Morgan had predicted. Unit 113 had allowed them to enter the valley, then systematically engage each team, separating them and preventing effective coordination. Change of plans, Harrington said grimly. We need to find cover and regroup. That outcropping at our 9 o'clock should provide some protection. As they changed direction, moving quickly toward the rocky shelter, the 2 figures they had been approaching suddenly rose and began running, not away from Alpha Team, but directly toward them. Contact front, Parker called, raising his weapon. Hold fire, Morgan ordered sharply. Look at how they're moving. The 2 men were running with jerky, uncoordinated movements, like puppets with half their strings cut. As they drew closer, their faces became visible. Blank, expressionless eyes. Vacant. That's Ramirez, Harrington confirmed, recognizing one of the men, and Collins. But something's wrong with them. They've been drugged, Morgan said, heavily dosed with the compound. They're not in control of their actions. As if to confirm her assessment, Ramirez and Collins suddenly stopped about 50 meters away. In perfect unison, they reached into their tattered uniforms and withdrew objects that glinted in the morning sun. "Grenades!" Parker shouted, diving for cover. But Morgan was already moving, tackling Harrington to the ground, as the two SEALs pulled the pins and released the spoons on what turned out to be smoke grenades. Thick grayish-white smoke began billowing from the devices, quickly obscuring the area. "Gas masks now," Morgan ordered, pulling her own from her equipment. The team complied instantly, securing their masks just as a distinctive sweet almond smell began to permeate the air around them. "It's in the smoke," Morgan explained, her voice muffled by her mask. "The compound is being delivered via the smoke grenades. They're using Ramirez and Collins as unwitting delivery systems." Through the thickening smoke, they could see the two SEALs collapsing to the ground, their brief role in Unit 113's plan apparently completed. Whether they were still alive was impossible to determine from this distance. "We need to get them," Harrington said, starting forward. Morgan held him back. "Not yet. They'll have snipers watching them, waiting for exactly that reaction. We need to—" Her warning was cut short by a new sound, the distinctive whoop-whoop of helicopter couture approaching rapidly. "The Apaches?" Parker asked hopefully. Morgan shook her head. "Wrong sound profile. Lighter aircraft. Mi-17, probably." As if summoned by her identification, a Russian-made helicopter appeared over the northern ridge, flying low and fast toward their position. Unlike the crude technicals and salvaged Soviet equipment typically used by OPFOR forces, this aircraft was well-maintained and operated with professional precision. "Unit 113's extraction vehicle," Morgan said grimly. "They're coming to collect their test subjects." Harrington keyed his radio. "All teams be advised, we have enemy air assets in the valley. Russian Mi-17 approaching from the north." Only static answered him. "Comms are being jammed," Parker reported, checking his equipment. "Complete spectrum denial." The helicopter was descending now, aiming for a landing zone near where Ramirez and Collins lay motionless. As it touched down, the side door slid open, and several figures emerged, men in modern tactical gear, without insignia, moving with the disciplined efficiency of Special Operations Forces. "We can't let them take Ramirez and Collins," Harrington said, determination hardening his voice. "Parker, set up your rifle here. When I give the signal, put fire on those operators. Williams, you're with the colonel and me. We're going to circle around and approach from their six." "Lieutenant," Morgan cautioned, "this is exactly the kind of reaction they're expecting." "Oh, then we'll have to be better than they expect," Harrington replied grimly. "You said their weakness is arrogance. Let's use that against them." Before Morgan could argue further, the tactical situation changed again. A tall figure emerged from the helicopter, older than the others, with silver hair visible beneath his tactical cap. Even at this distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable. "Baranov," Morgan whispered, recognition and old hatred coloring her voice. Harrington glanced at her. "The Unit 113 commander." "You're sure?" "I'd recognize him anywhere," Morgan confirmed, her eyes never leaving the distant figure. "He's the one who was behind Boston, the one who's been hunting me ever since." "And now you found each other again," Harrington observed. "No coincidence, I'm guessing." "No," Morgan agreed grimly. "This whole operation, the attacks on your teams, the capture of Ramirez and Collins, it was all designed to draw me in. Harrison must have recognized my name when the Pentagon assigned me to investigate and alerted Baranov." "So this isn't just about testing their compound," Harrington concluded. "It's personal for Baranov. Everything is personal with him." Morgan's eyes hardened behind her mask. "In Boston, he forced me to watch as my team tore itself apart under the influence of his compound. He wanted me to see what it could do to understand his achievement before he killed me." "But you survived." "Yes, and he's never forgiven me for that." Morgan checked her weapon, "which is why we're going to use his obsession against him. He wants me, not Ramirez and Collins. They're just bait." "What are you suggesting?" "A trade. Me for your men." Harrington shook his head firmly. "Not happening, Colonel. We don't sacrifice our people. There's always another way." "I'm not suggesting suicide, Lieutenant," Morgan assured him. I'm suggesting we give Baronov what he thinks he wants, while we take what we actually need. As they watched, Baronov knelt beside the motionless forms of Ramirez and Collins, examining them with clinical detachment. He spoke to one of his operators, who produced what appeared to be medical equipment from a case. "They're taking samples," Morgan explained. "Blood tissue, possibly cerebrospinal fluid, documenting the compound's effects." "Like lab rats," Harrington said, disgust evident in his voice. "Exactly like lab rats. And that's our opportunity." Morgan turned to Harrington, her plan fully formed. "They're distracted with their sample collection. If we can create a diversion on the western ridge, something to draw their security team's attention, we might be able to approach from the east and extract Ramirez and Collins before they realize what's happening." Harrington considered this. "We'd need to coordinate with Charlie team to create the diversion. With comms jammed, that's not possible." "Unless we use the old ways," Morgan said, removing a small mirror from her equipment. "Signal mirror. Charlie team should have one in their standard kit. If we can get to a position with line of sight to their location, we can use predetermined signals to coordinate the attack." It was a desperate plan, relying on multiple factors beyond their control. But in the chaos of the valley, with teams separated and communications jammed, i.e. desperate measures were all they had left. Parker Harrington decided, "You stay here and maintain overwatch. Williams, you're with us. We're going to circle around to that elevated position to the east. From there, we should have line of sight to both Charlie team and Baranov's extraction operation." As they moved out, staying low and using the terrain for concealment, Harrington glanced at Morgan. "You've been preparing for this moment for 7 years, haven't you? The chance to face Baranov again." "Yes," Morgan admitted quietly, "but not like this. Not with American operators caught in the crossfire." "We'll get them out," Harrington promised, "and then we'll deal with Baranov." "If we get the chance," Morgan replied. "Unit 113 doesn't leave witnesses, Lieutenant. Once they've collected their data, they'll withdraw and destroy all evidence of their presence, including us." The implication was clear. They weren't just fighting to rescue Ramirez and Collins. They were fighting for their own survival in a valley that had already claimed 3 SEAL teams. And time was running out. The elevated position east of Baranov's landing zone provided the vantage point they needed. From here, Harrington, Morgan, and Williams could see both the Mi-17 helicopter, where Unit 113 was processing Ramirez and Collins, and the western ridge where Charlie team was pinned down by sniper fire. "I've got visual on Thompson," Williams reported, scanning the ridge with his binoculars. "They've taken cover behind that rock outcropping at the tree line. I count 3 operators still mobile." Harrington processed this grim information. 3 mobile operators out of a team of 5 meant at least 2 casualties, possibly fatal. "Can you establish mirror contact?" Williams adjusted his signal wire, catching the sunlight and directing a series of flashes toward Charlie team's position. After a tense moment, an answering flash came back. "Contact established," Williams confirmed. "Ready to transmit. Tell them we need a diversion in 5 minutes. Maximum noise, minimum exposure. Then immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Bravo." Williams translated this into the simplified code of mirror flashes, sending the message in short bursts to avoid detection by Unit 113's observers. The acknowledgement came back promptly, 3 quick flashes, the signal for "Understood and will comply." "They've got it," Williams reported. 5 minutes to diversion." Harrington turned his attention back to the landing zone. Baranov and his team had finished their examination of Ramirez and Collins and were preparing to move them into the helicopter. Both SEALs appeared to be alive, but completely unresponsive, like human cargo being efficiently processed. "We're going to have one shot at this," Harrington said, laying out the plan. "When Charlie team creates their diversion, we move fast and low directly to Ramirez and Collins. Williams, you take Collins. I'll take Ramirez. Colonel, you'll provide covering fire. Once we have our men, we fall back to that drainage ditch we passed, then make our way to Rally Point Bravo." "And if we encounter Baranov," Morgan asked, her voice neutral, but her eyes fixed on the silver-haired figure supervising the operation below. "We avoid engagement if possible," Harrington said firmly. "The priority is extracting our men, not settling old scores." Morgan nodded, though Harrington suspected her agreement was conditional at best. 7 years of hunting a man created a momentum not easily redirected. As they waited for Charlie team's diversion, Williams suddenly stiffened. "Movement on the southern approach. Looks like Bravo team or what's left of them." Harrington shifted his binoculars to the indicated area. Indeed, Sullivan and three other operators were making their way cautiously along the southern edge of the valley, using the terrain for cover as they approached the landing zone. They must have the same idea we do, Harrington said. A rescue attempt. Or they're walking into another trap, Morgan cautioned. The timing is too convenient. Before they could debate further, the western ridge erupted in a fusillade of gunfire. Charlie team had initiated their diversion, and they'd done so with impressive firepower M4s on full automatic, accompanied by the distinctive thump of 40mm grenade launchers. That's our cue, Harrington said, already moving. Let's go. The three operators descended from their position rapidly, using the distraction to approach the landing zone from its least defended angle. Unit 113's security team had indeed shifted their attention to the western threat, with several operators taking up firing positions facing Charlie team's location. Baranov, however, remained focused on the helicopter preparations, seemingly unconcerned by the firefight erupting across the valley. His confidence was palpable, even at a distance, the assurance of a man who believed he had accounted for every variable, every potential threat. Harrington, Morgan, and Williams were within 50 meters of the helicopter when the situation changed dramatically. Sullivan and his team from Bravo, seeing the same opportunity created by Charlie team's diversion, launched their own assault from the south, a coordinated rush toward the landing zone. This two-pronged attack should have caught Unit 113 in a classic pincer movement. Instead, it triggered a response that suggested they had been expecting exactly this scenario. With mechanical precision, half their operators swung to engage Bravo team, while the others maintained suppressive fire on Charlie team's position. It was the practiced response of a unit that had rehearsed this exact scenario multiple times. It's an ambush within an ambush, Morgan realized aloud. They knew we'd try a rescue during the diversion. Harrington made a split-second decision. Change of plan. Williams, link up with Bravo team and provide support. Colonel, you're still with me. We'll use the confusion to get to Ramirez and Collins. As Williams peeled off toward Sullivan's embattled team, Harrington and Morgan continued their approach, now crawling through the sparse vegetation to avoid detection. The noise of the battle provided cover for their movement, but it also meant that Unit 113 was fully alert and engaged. They were close enough now to see Ramirez and Collins clearly. Both men were secured to stretchers beside the helicopter medical monitoring equipment attached to their bodies. They were alive but completely non-responsive, their eyes open but vacant test subjects rather than soldiers. Baranov remained near the helicopter, observing the battle with the detached interest of a scientist monitoring an experiment. Beside him stood a figure that made Morgan freeze momentarily in recognition. "Harrison," she whispered, genuine surprise in her voice. "He's here." Indeed, Colonel Harrison was standing beside Baranov, dressed not in his U.S. Army uniform, but in civilian tactical gear. He was gesturing toward the battle, apparently providing real-time analysis of the American forces' movements and tactics. "Son of a bitch," Harrington muttered, the final confirmation of Harrison's betrayal landing like a physical blow. "He's feeding them our playbook." "This changes things," Morgan said grimly. "Harrison knows all our extraction protocols, all our rally points. Any plan we had is compromised." Harrington processed this quickly. "Then we improvise. New plan. We take Harrison too as a prisoner as leverage. Unit 113 may not care about American lives, but they'll care about protecting their asset." It was a bold adjustment, adding significant risk to an already dangerous extraction. But with their original plan in tatters, adaptability was their only advantage. They were within 20 meters of the helicopter when Harrington spotted an opportunity. Baranov and Harrison had moved to the far side of the aircraft to get a better view of the engagement with Bravo team, leaving only two operators guarding Ramirez and Collins. "Now," Harrington whispered, rising to a crouch. Fast and silent. Fast and silent, they covered the remaining distance in a controlled rush, using the helicopter's bulk to shield their approach from the main force of Unit 113 operators. Morgan reached the first guard, dispatching him with a silent knife strike to the base of the skull before he could raise an alarm. Harrington took the second with similar efficiency, a chokehold that rendered the man unconscious in seconds. "Check their vital signs," Harrington ordered, gesturing to Ramirez and Collins while he secured the unconscious guards. Morgan examined both men quickly, her movements those of someone with medical training. Alive but heavily sedated. Pupils dilated, pulse elevated. Multiple injection sites. She shook her head grimly. They've been used as test subjects for days. Can they be moved? They'll have to be by the monitoring equipment is too bulky to bring along. She began disconnecting the leads and IVs from both men. They're stable for now, but they'll need proper medical attention soon. Harrington was about to respond when movement caught his eye. Harrison rounding the nose of the helicopter, stopping in shock at the sight of Harrington and Morgan with the captured SEALs. For a frozen moment, the base XO and the SEAL lieutenant stared at each other, betrayer, and betrayed the truth finally laid bare between them. Lieutenant Harrison recovered first, his hand moving toward the sidearm at his hip. This isn't what it looks like. Save it, Harrington snarled, his own weapon already trained on Harrison's chest. Hands where I can see them, Colonel. You're coming with us. I can't do that. Harrison's voice was surprisingly calm. You don't understand what's happening here. This is bigger than you, bigger than these men. Enlighten me, Harrington replied coldly, advancing on Harrison with lethal intent in his eyes. The compound, Harrison began, his hands raised but his posture remaining confident. It's revolutionary, non-lethal battlefield control, the ability to incapacitate enemy forces without killing them. Do you have any idea what that's worth? How many lives it could save in the long run? Tell that to the 23 dead operators in this valley, Harrington countered. Tell that to Ramirez and Collins used like lab rats for your revolution. Acceptable losses in the development of any new technology, a new voice interjected, cultured, slightly accented, chillingly calm. Baranov had appeared behind Harrison, his own weapon held casually but competently at his side. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall, distinguished, with the cold eyes of a predator accustomed to success. Lieutenant Harrington, he continued conversationally, I've studied your file. Impressive record. Multiple combat deployments, Silver Star in Afghanistan, Bronze Star with Valor device in Iraq. A genuine American hero. He smiled thinly. And yet here you are outmaneuvered and surrounded. Only then did Harrington notice the Unit 113 operators who had silently taken up positions around them, weapons trained on him and Morgan. The diversion had failed. Both Charlie and Bravo teams were now pinned down by superior firepower and positioning unable to provide support. Colonel Morgan, Baranov shifted his attention. Or should I say Sarah Mitchell? It's been too long. Boston seems like another lifetime, doesn't it? Not long enough, Maya, Morgan replied, using his first name with deliberate familiarity. I see you're still using others to do your dirty work. While you're still rushing headlong into traps, Baranov countered with almost friendly reproach. Some things never change. The standoff was interrupted by the approaching sound of helicopter rotors, not from the Mi-17, but from a different direction. The Apaches, Harrington realized. Our air support is finally arriving. Too little too late, I'm afraid, Baranov said, checking his watch. My compliments on your persistence, Lieutenant. But this experiment has yielded all the data we require. It's time for us to depart. You're not taking Ramirez and Collins, Harrington said firmly, his weapon still trained on Harrison, but his awareness encompassing the entire tactical situation. I don't need to, Baranov replied with disturbing confidence. Their blood tissue and neurological responses have already been documented. The physical specimens themselves are now surplus to requirements. The implication was clear and chilling. Unit 113 had what they needed from the captured SEALs. The men themselves were now disposable. Why, Mael? Morgan asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity beneath the tension. Why go to all this trouble, the compound, the elaborate trap using Harrison to compromise multiple SEAL teams? What's the end game? Progress, my dear Sarah. Baranov's eyes gleamed with zealous conviction. The next evolution in warfare. Imagine armies rendered helpless without a single fatality. Populations pacified without destruction of infrastructure. Perfect control. Mind control, Morgan translated flatly. That's what you're really after, not incapacitation domination. A crude simplification, but essentially correct. Baranov nodded to his operators, who began falling back toward the helicopter while maintaining their weapons on Harrington and Morgan. The compound you encountered in Boston was primitive, a blunt instrument that caused generalized disorientation and fear. What we've developed here is targeted, precise. It can induce specific emotional and cognitive states. compliance, suggestion, even loyalty. You're insane, Harrington said flatly. No, Lieutenant. I'm visionary. Baronov began backing toward the helicopter himself, keeping Harrison between him and Harrington's weapon. History is written by visionaries willing to cross boundaries others fear to approach. Ask Robert Oppenheimer. Ask Albert Hoffman. Ask your own MK Ultra researchers. The Apaches were visible now, approaching rapidly from the southeast. Unit 113's operators had nearly completed their withdrawal to the Mi-17, which had begun spooling up its rotors for immediate departure. This isn't over, my Soldado, Morgan called over the growing noise. On that, we agree, Baronov replied with what appeared to be genuine warmth. Until next time, Sarah. In the moment of distraction created by the approaching Apaches, Harrison made his move not to escape but to attack. His hand dropped to his sidearm with practiced speed drawing and aiming at Harrington in one fluid motion. Morgan reacted instantly, tackling Harrington aside as Harrison's shot went wide. Her own weapon came up 2 precise rounds, striking Harrison's center mass before he could fire again. The base XO collapsed, blood blooming across his chest, his expression one of surprise rather than pain. I was trying to help, he gasped before the light faded from his eyes. The moment Harrison fell, Unit 113 opened fire from the helicopter, forcing Harrington and Morgan to take cover behind the stretchers where Ramirez and Collins lay. The Mi-17 was lifting off now, its door gunner laying down suppressive fire to cover their escape. The Apaches arrived seconds too late, their missile systems locked onto the Russian helicopter, but unable to fire with American forces so close to the target. By the time they had established a clear firing solution, the Mi-17 was disappearing over the northern ridge, taking Baronov and the secrets of Unit 113's compound with it. Charlie Team, Bravo Team, report status. Harrington called into his radio as the jamming suddenly ceased with Unit 113's departure. Charlie Team, here. Thompson's voice came back strained but alive. 2 KIA, 1 wounded. We're mobile but need medical evac. Bravo Team 3, Mobile 1 critical, Sullivan reported next. We've secured our position but need immediate assistance with casualties. Harrington looked to Morgan, who was checking Ramirez and Collins again. They're stable, she confirmed, but they need proper medical attention as soon as possible. The compound has done significant damage to their neurological systems. The Apaches circled overhead, providing security as a medical evacuation was coordinated. What had begun as a rescue mission had turned into a recovery operation, retrieving the wounded and the dead from a valley that had once again proven itself a killing ground. As they waited for the medevac helicopters, Harrington knelt beside Harrison's body, searching for any clue that might explain the man's betrayal. In the colonel's pocket, he found a small notebook filled with what appeared to be meeting times, coordinates, and payment amounts, the documented record of his treachery. He was ambitious, Morgan said quietly, joining Harrington. Ambitious men are easy to turn if you know which buttons to push. Baronov is an expert at finding those buttons. You saved my life, Harrington acknowledged, looking up at her. Harrison would have killed me if you hadn't reacted so quickly. Professional courtesy, Morgan replied with the ghost of a smile. Besides, I've lost too many good operators to Baronov already. I wasn't about to lose another. The distant sound of approaching helicopters signaled the arrival of the medical evacuation team. Soon they would leave this valley of death behind, carrying their wounded and their dead along it with questions that still demanded answers. Baronov got away, Harrington said, staring toward the northern ridge where the Mi-17 had disappeared. With all his research data, all the evidence of what they were doing here. For now, Morgan agreed, but he made a mistake today. What mistake? He let me see his face again. Morgan said, her eyes cold with resolve. He reminded me why I've spent 7 years hunting him, and now I know what he's really after. That makes him predictable. You think he'll try again, another test, another valley? I'm counting on it, Morgan replied quietly, and next time I'll be waiting. Blood stained the Montana dust red as the SEAL teams regrouped at the valley's edge. The medical evacuation helicopters had taken the most critically wounded, but many still required treatment. 5 dead, 7 wounded. The cost of a mission compromised from the start. Harrington moved among his men, checking injuries, offering words of encouragement, carrying the weight of command on shoulders already burdened by grief. The haunted look in his eyes had deepened, but there was something else there now, resolve hardened in the forge of betrayal. Morgan stood apart, studying the rugged terrain that separated them from safety. The only viable exit route was through a narrow canyon 2 kilometers north, a natural choke point that might as well have had ambush painted across its entrance in blood-red letters. "We need to move soon," she said as Harrington approached. "Those Apache gunships won't stay on station forever, and Unit 113 won't be gone long." Harrington nodded grimly. "We've stabilized everyone who can be moved. What's our best option?" Morgan gestured toward the canyon. "That's our only way out with the wounded. But Unit 113 knows it too. You think they're waiting for us?" "I know they are. Cooper wasn't on the Mi-17 with Baronov. He's still out there, and he knows these mountains better than any of us." Sullivan joined them, wiping blood from his hands with a stained cloth. The veteran medic's face was lined with fatigue, but his eyes remained sharp. "Everyone's ready to move," he reported. "But some of these boys won't make it far without proper medical attention." "All the more reason to get moving," Harrington decided. "We'll form a defensive perimeter around the wounded. Alpha team on Point Bravo covering our six what's left of Charlie on the flanks." As the teams prepared to move out, Morgan pulled Harrington aside. "There's something you should know before we enter that canyon," she said, her voice low. "Harrison's notebook doesn't just contain meeting times and payment records. It has the names and positions of every Unit 113 asset embedded in U.S. military and intelligence operations." Harrington's eyes widened slightly. "That's why Baranov wants it so badly. If that data gets back to Washington, his entire network collapses. Years of careful positioning, millions in bribes and blackmail, all wasted." Morgan's expression hardened. "He won't let us leave with it. Not without a fight." "Then we give him one," Harrington said simply. The wounded moved slowly across the valley floor, each step a painful reminder of their vulnerability. Overhead, the Apache gunships circled like predatory birds, providing what cover they could. But their fuel was limited, their presence temporary. As they approached the canyon entrance, Thompson from Charlie Team raised his fist, the signal to halt. He pointed toward a ridgeline 300 meters ahead. "Movement," he whispered into his radio. "Multiple tangos setting up positions." Harrington raised his binoculars. Through them, he could make out several figures in tactical gear positioning themselves among the rocks. At their center stood a familiar figure, Master Sergeant James Cooper. "Looks like the welcoming committee," Harrington muttered. The radio crackled to life, Cooper's voice filling their headsets with unwelcome familiarity. "Attention SEAL teams. This is Master Sergeant Cooper. You are surrounded and outgunned. We have no interest in unnecessary casualties. Colonel Morgan, we know you have Harrison's data. Surrender it and yourself and the rest of your people can leave unharmed." The SEAL teams looked to Harrington, who turned to Morgan, the question unspoken but clear in his eyes. "He's lying," Morgan said quietly. "The moment they have me and the data, they'll eliminate all witnesses. That's their standard protocol." "What's your call, Lieutenant?" Sullivan asked Harrington. Before Harrington could answer, Morgan spoke up. "I have an alternative. There's an old trail, Ridgeline Alpha. It doesn't appear on any maps, but I know it's there. It leads around the canyon to an extraction point 12 kilometers north." "How do you know about a trail that's not on any maps?" Thompson asked suspiciously. "Because I was here before," Morgan replied. 7 years ago, tracking a Russian agent. The trail was used by bootleggers during Prohibition, then by special forces for covert training during the Cold War. Harrington studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, he made his decision. "Sullivan, you take the wounded and the majority of our remaining operators. Follow Colonel Morgan's route to the extraction point. Thompson, you and your best men create a diversion at the canyon entrance. Make it look like we're all attempting to break through." "And you?" Sullivan asked. "The colonel and I will deal with Cooper." The teams dispersed to their assigned tasks, moving with the disciplined efficiency of men who understood exactly what was at stake. As Sullivan led the wounded toward the concealed trail, Harrington turned to Morgan. "What's your plan for Cooper?" Morgan checked her weapon with mechanical precision. "We give him what he wants. Me." Cooper watched through high-powered binoculars as the SEAL teams appeared to split the main force, moving toward the canyon entrance, while a smaller group seemed to be circling north. "They're trying to flank us," he said to the mercenary beside him. "Predictable. Send Team 2 to cut them off." "Yes, sir," the man replied, relaying the orders through his radio. Cooper returned his attention to the approaching force. Something wasn't right. The formation was too loose, the approach too obvious. Harrington was a better tactician than this. Then he saw her, Morgan, walking alone toward their position, hands raised in apparent surrender. Well, I'll be damned, Cooper muttered. She's actually giving herself up. He raised his voice, speaking into the radio. Hold your fire. I want her alive. Morgan continued her approach, stopping 50 meters from Cooper's position. That's far enough, Sarah, Cooper called out. Where's the data? Right here, Morgan replied, patting the pocket of her tactical vest. But you're going to have to come get it, James. I'm not climbing up there just to make it easier for you to put a bullet in my head. Cooper considered this, then nodded to two of his men. Bring her up. Search her thoroughly. As the mercenaries descended toward Morgan, Cooper scanned the valley floor looking for signs of Harrington. The lieutenant was nowhere to be seen, which made Cooper increasingly uneasy. The mercenaries reached Morgan, roughly patting her down and removing her weapons before marching her up the slope to Cooper's position. Hello, James, Morgan said calmly as they came face to face. I have to admit, I didn't think you'd surrender. Cooper replied, studying her with narrowed eyes. It's not your style. Things change. People change. Morgan glanced around at the mercenaries. So this is what you've been reduced to, commanding hired guns instead of American soldiers? Cooper's jaw tightened. Where's Harrington? Evacuating the wounded. I made a deal, my surrender for their safe passage. Noble but ultimately pointless, Cooper said. Now the data. Morgan slowly reached into her vest pocket and removed Harrison's notebook. Everything Baranov needs to preserve his network. Names, dates, locations, payment amounts. Cooper reached for the notebook, but Morgan pulled it back slightly. Before I give you this, I want to know something. Why, James, was it just the money? Or did you actually believe in what Unit 113 is doing? Cooper's expression darkened. You still don't get it, do you? This was never about money. It's about the future of warfare. Mind control, Morgan said flatly. Targeted neurological influence, Cooper corrected. Why do you think Phantom Echo was disbanded? We were getting too close to the truth. Our own government was developing the very technology you're now fighting against. Morgan's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Project Mindscape, Cooper said, watching her reaction carefully. The CIA's attempt to create a chemical compound that could influence cognitive function. It started in the 70s, went underground in the 80s, and was officially terminated in the 90s. Officially, Morgan repeated. Nothing ever really ends in our line of work, Sarah. It just gets renamed, rebudgeted, and relocated. Cooper's voice took on a bitter edge. I was there when they tested the first version of the compound on volunteer subjects. I saw what it did to them. When Washington shut it down, the Russians were more than happy to continue our research. So you sold out, betrayed your country, your oath. I chose the winning side, Cooper snapped, the side that understood what we were creating. Do you have any idea what this technology is worth? Not just in dollars, but in geopolitical power. The ability to pacify entire populations without firing a shot. Or to turn them into mindless drones, Morgan countered. Is that what happened to you in Boston? Did Baranov use his own compound on you? A flicker of uncertainty crossed Cooper's face, quickly suppressed. You always were too clever for your own good. And you always were a terrible liar, Morgan replied. Baranov's been using you, James. You're as much a test subject as Ramirez and Collins. Cooper's hand moved to his sidearm. Enough talk. Give me the notebook. Morgan held it out, and as Cooper reached for it, she asked, Did you ever wonder why I was immune to the compound in Boston? Cooper hesitated, curiosity momentarily overriding caution. Baranov's scientists never figured it out. It's because I was already exposed, Morgan said. In Detroit, Project Red Dawn. I was part of the control group for the American version of the compound. You're lying. There was no Project Red Dawn. Wasn't there? Morgan's eyes locked with his. Check the third page of Harrison's notes, the one in code. It lists all the original test subjects, including you, James. Cooper's expression faltered. His hand trembled slightly as he flipped through the notebook, finding the page Morgan had mentioned. As his eyes scanned the coded text, his face drained of color. This is a trick, he whispered, but the conviction had left his voice. Is it? Morgan asked softly. How long have you been having the headaches, James, the moments of lost time, the flashes of memories that don't quite feel like your own? Cooper staggered back a step, his hand going to his temple, as if in pain. The mercenaries exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain what to do, as their commander appeared to be unraveling. Baranov never trusted you, Morgan continued, her voice taking on a hypnotic quality. You were his first American test subject, his prototype. All these years you thought you were serving him, but you were just another experiment. Stop it, Cooper growled, raising his weapon. Stop it. The triggers are in there too, Morgan pressed on. The phrases he uses to control you. Did you ever wonder why you get so angry when someone mentions Detroit? Cooper's finger tightened on the trigger. I said stop. Detroit, Morgan repeated. Project Mindscape. Red Dawn. Control parameters 973. The color drained from Cooper's face. His weapon wavered, then lowered slightly. How do you know those words? Because I was there, James. I was part of the team that tried to save you after Baranov got his hooks into you, but you were already gone. Morgan's voice softened with what sounded like genuine regret. I'm sorry, I truly am. For a moment, something like recognition flickered in Cooper's eyes, a glimpse of the man he had once been. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. Kill her, he ordered the mercenaries. Kill her now. Before they could react, the sharp crack of a high-powered rifle split the air. One of the mercenaries dropped a precision shot through the head. Then another fell. Harrington, positioned on a rocky outcrop 200 meters away, worked the bolt of his sniper rifle with mechanical efficiency. Each shot found its mark, creating chaos among Cooper's men. In the confusion, Morgan moved. A hidden blade appeared in her hand, driving upward into the nearest mercenary's throat. She claimed his weapon as he fell, turning it on the next man. Cooper fired wildly, his shots going wide as Morgan rolled behind cover. The remaining mercenaries scattered, trying to locate Harrington's firing position while defending against Morgan's unexpected attack. Cooper, Morgan called out. It doesn't have to end this way. Surrender and we can help you. The effects of the compound can be reversed. Liar, Cooper shouted back, his voice cracking with strain. There's no going back, not for any of us. He broke cover, charging toward Morgan's position with reckless abandon. She met him halfway, deflecting his weapon and driving her shoulder into his chest. They tumbled to the ground, locked in a desperate struggle. Cooper was heavier, stronger, fueled by rage and whatever chemical cocktail Baranov had pumped into his system. But Morgan was faster, more controlled, fighting with the cold precision of someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment. They exchanged blows, neither gaining the upper hand until Cooper managed to pin Morgan against a boulder, his hands closing around her throat. You should have died in Boston, he snarled, his face inches from hers. You should have remembered your training. Morgan gasped. With a sudden movement, she drove her knee upward, breaking his grip. As Cooper stumbled back, Morgan spun, delivering a precise strike to his throat. Cooper dropped to his knees, gasping for air. Morgan stood over him, retrieving her weapon from where it had fallen during their struggle. It's over, James, she said quietly. Cooper looked up at her, and for a brief moment, clarity returned to his eyes. Sarah, he whispered, the trigger phrase. In my pocket. The phone. Morgan cautiously reached into Cooper's jacket, retrieving a satellite phone. On its screen was a text message containing a series of words and numbers, the control protocol Baranov used to activate his sleeper agents. How many others are there? Morgan asked. How many more like you, Bucky? Dozens. Cooper managed his breathing, labored. Maybe hundreds. He's been planning this for years. The compound. It's just the beginning. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Not the stuttering roar of the Apaches, but the deeper rumble of transport choppers. That'll be Sullivan with the extraction team, Morgan said, helping Cooper to his feet. Can you walk? Cooper nodded weakly. What happens to me now? That depends on how much you're willing to tell us about Baranov and Unit 113. He'll kill me, Cooper said, genuine fear in his voice. Not if we get to him first. The Blackhawks landed in a clearing 2 kilometers north of the canyon. Sullivan had successfully led the wounded to the extraction point using Morgan's hidden trail, avoiding Cooper's ambush entirely. As the teams loaded onto the helicopters, Harrington approached Morgan, who was securing Cooper for transport. Mission accomplished, Lieutenant, she said. Everyone who survived is going home. Not everyone, Harrington replied grimly, thinking of the men they'd lost. No, Morgan agreed. Not everyone. They boarded the last helicopter in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, as the Black Hawk lifted off, carrying them away from Viper Valley and the ghosts it now contained. 3 weeks later, a military hospital in Virginia. Harrington stood at the window of his private room, watching autumn leaves drift from the trees outside. His recovery had been slow but steady. The specialized treatment protocols developed to counteract Baranov's compound, gradually purging it from his system and repairing the neurological damage it had caused. Behind him, Sullivan was conducting his daily examination of Ramirez and Collins, whose conditions had also improved markedly under the specialized care. Both men were now conscious and responsive, though their memories of their time in captivity remained fragmented. "Looking good, Mike," Sullivan reported, joining Harrington at the window after completing his examinations. "Another week, maybe two, and you'll be cleared for limited duty." "And them?" Harrington asked, nodding toward his two operators. Sullivan's expression was cautiously optimistic. "Better than expected. Cognitive functions, returning motor skills, improving daily. They'll never operate again, but they'll have lives worth living." It was indeed a remarkable outcome, given the severity of their exposure to Baranov's compound. The specialized treatment developed by the medical team, based in part on the counteragent Morgan had provided, and in part on the research data they had recovered, had proven more effective than anyone had anticipated. "Any word from Morgan?" Sullivan asked. "Nothing official," Harrington replied. "General Howard says she's on assignment, whatever that means." The truth was that Olivia Ghost Morgan, or Sarah Mitchell, or whatever name she was using now, had disappeared from their lives as completely as she had entered them. After ensuring that Harrington and his men were receiving proper treatment, she had vanished back into the shadows. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Brigadier General Howard, who entered the room with brisk efficiency. The general had become a regular presence during their recovery, overseeing not just their medical treatment, but also the debriefing process. "Lieutenant Sergeant," Howard greeted them, "good to see you both up and about. I have some updates you might find interesting." "Sir," Harrington prompted, "Operation Silent Justice." Howard began using the code name assigned to the counterintelligence operation against Baranov's network. "Phase 1 complete. 3 senior officers, 7 intelligence analysts, and 12 defense contractors identified and neutralized. Financial channels, frozen research facilities, seized communications, networks disrupted. The scale of the operation was impressive, a coordinated strike against a network that had operated undetected for decades." But Harrington noted the careful phrasing, "Phase 1. In Baranov, he asked the question that mattered most. Howard's expression tightened slightly. "Still at large, but his resources are diminished, his network compromised. He's running, not operating. And Colonel Morgan, is she part of Phase 2? "That's actually why I'm here," Howard replied, his tone shifting to something more formal. "Lieutenant Harrington, your medical status has been provisionally upgraded. Not for full duty, but sufficient for a limited advisory role in a specialized operation." Harrington straightened, immediately alert to the implications. "What kind of operation, sir?" "The kind that doesn't officially exist," Howard answered. "Conducted by personnel who don't officially exist, targeting an individual who has caused significant harm to American interests and personnel." The meaning was clear, though carefully couched in the euphemisms of covert operations. This was about Baranov. This was about finishing what had begun in Viper Valley. "When and where?" Harrington asked simply. "Tomorrow. A secure facility near Langley, if you're interested." And it wasn't really a question. Howard knew, as did Harrington himself, that there was only one possible answer. The hunt for Baranov had become personal for all of them, but especially for the SEAL lieutenant who had watched his men suffer and die because of the Russian colonel's obsession. "I'll be ready, sir," Harrington confirmed. The following morning, a nondescript sedan with government plates arrived to transport Harrington to the secure facility Howard had mentioned. The facility itself was equally nondescript, a modern office building indistinguishable from dozens of others in the area, its true purpose hidden behind the bland facade of a technology consulting firm. Inside, however, the security measures were state-of-the-art and comprehensive, with multiple checkpoints and identity verification procedures before Harrington was finally escorted to a conference room on the top floor. General Howard was waiting along with 3 other individuals whose identities weren't immediately apparent, but whose bearing marked them as intelligence professionals of considerable experience. "Lieutenant Harrington," Howard greeted him, "thank you for joining us. Your perspective will be valuable in the planning phase of this operation." Before Howard could continue, a screen at the far end of the room activated, revealing a secure video feed. In the center of the frame sat Olivia Morgan, or Blackwood, as Harrington still thought of her. She looked different, her hair shorter, lighter in color, and she wore civilian clothes rather than military attire. But her eyes were the same, those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through facades to the truth beneath. "Lieutenant," she greeted him, a small smile touching her lips. "Good to see you up and about." Colonel Harrington replied, genuinely pleased to see her, or whatever rank you are using these days. "We've located Baranov," Morgan said without preamble. "Eastern Europe, a research facility disguised as a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant. He's continuing his work on the compound, albeit with limited resources and personnel." One of the screens changed to display satellite imagery of an industrial complex surrounded by forested terrain. Architectural diagrams appeared alongside the images showing the interior layout of the facility. "Our intelligence suggests he's accelerated the development timeline," Morgan continued. "The loss of the Viper Valley data was a significant setback, but he's compensating by taking greater risks pursuing more aggressive research protocols." "Human testing," Harrington guessed grimly. "Yes, unwilling subjects acquired through various means. The local authorities have noted an increase in missing persons cases in the surrounding area, particularly among the homeless and refugee populations." The clinical description couldn't mask the horror of what Baranov was doing, continuing his research at the cost of innocent lives, pursuing his obsession with controlling the human mind regardless of the human suffering involved. "What's the plan?" Harrington asked, his resolve hardening. General Howard took over the briefing at this point. "A joint operation between specialized intelligence assets and a small military contingent. Infiltration of the facility, seizure of research materials, apprehension of Baranov and key personnel, extraction of any test subjects who can be saved." "My role, advisory," Howard replied firmly. "Your experience with Baranov's tactics and the compound's effects makes you invaluable to the planning phase, but your medical status precludes direct participation in the field operation." Harrington had expected this answer, but it didn't lessen his disappointment. The idea of Morgan confronting Baranov without his support didn't sit well with him, regardless of her obvious capabilities. "I understand, sir," he acknowledged, maintaining professional courtesy, despite his reservations. "But I'd like to request on-site advisory status during the operation itself, not in the field but at the forward command post." Howard considered this request thoughtfully, then nodded. "Granted, you'll join the command team at the forward operating base, but you do not under any circumstances enter the field. Is that clear, Lieutenant?" "Crystal clear, sir." As the briefing concluded and the other participants began to file out, General Howard arranged for Harrington to have a few moments of private communication with Morgan. "You look better," she observed once they were alone. "The treatment protocols are working." "They are," Harrington confirmed, "thanks to the data you recovered. It's helped not just me, but Ramirez and Collins too. Sullivan says they will recover more function than anyone expected." "Good," Morgan said, genuine relief evident in her expression. "They deserve better than what happened to them." A brief silence fell between them, not awkward, but contemplative, both recognizing the significance of the operation they were about to undertake and the closure it represented for their shared journey. "Baranov won't surrender," Harrington said finally. "You know that, right? He'll force a confrontation." "I'm counting on it," Morgan replied, her expression hardening slightly. "After all these years, all the damage he's done, all the lives he's destroyed, it needs to end decisively." "Just be careful," Harrington urged, surprising himself with the depth of concern behind the simple words. "He's been planning for this confrontation as long as you have." Morgan's expression softened slightly, a genuine smile touching her lips. "I will be. And Michael, thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for helping me complete this mission when it cost you and your men so much." "We all serve in different ways," Harrington replied. "Some in the light, some in the shadows, but we serve the same purpose in the end." "See you in Eastern Europe, Lieutenant," Morgan said as the connection prepared to terminate. "Count on it, Colonel," Harrington replied, "or Olivia or Sarah or whatever name you're using these days." Her smile was the last thing he saw before the screen went dark, leaving him with the certainty that their story was approaching its final chapter, the culmination of a hunt that had spanned continents and decades. A confrontation between a woman who officially didn't exist and the man who had pursued her through the shadows of a world few civilians would ever glimpse. The forward operating base for Operation Silent Justice was a repurposed hunting lodge deep in the forests of Eastern Europe. Harrington arrived as planned 24 hours before the scheduled infiltration. The command center had been established in what had once been the lodge's main dining room, with advanced communications equipment and tactical displays replacing the rustic furniture. Morgan was already there reviewing final intelligence reports with the operational team. She looked up as Harrington entered, acknowledging his arrival with a nod that managed to convey both professional courtesy and personal recognition. "Welcome to the party, Lieutenant," she said, just in time for the final briefing. The infiltration team consisted of 12 operators, a mix of special forces and intelligence specialists, all with extensive experience in covert operations. Their target was the pharmaceutical facility, identified as Baronov's current base of operations, located 30 kilometers north of the hunting lodge. Morgan led the briefing, her command of the tactical situation impressive even to Harrington, who had seen the best the Navy had to offer. "Based on our intelligence, Baranov is holding at least 8 test subjects in a subterranean level beneath the main facility," she explained, indicating the area on a 3-dimensional holographic display. "Our primary objectives are their extraction and the seizure of all research data related to the compound." "And Baranov himself," one of the operators asked. "A high-value target, but secondary to the rescue of the test subjects and the intelligence gathering," Morgan replied, though Harrington noted the slight tension in her jaw that belied her professional detachment. "We want him alive if possible, but not at the expense of the primary objectives." The briefing continued, covering infiltration routes, contingency plans, and extraction protocols. Throughout, Harrington was struck by the thoroughness of Morgan's planning, every detail considered, every potential complication anticipated. As the team dispersed to make their final preparations, Morgan joined Harrington at the communication station he had been assigned. "Impressed?" she asked, noting his expression. "7 years of hunting the same target will make anyone thorough," Harrington replied. "But yes, it's a solid plan." But Harrington hesitated, then voiced the concern that had been nagging at him since the briefing began. "It's too perfect, too by the book. Baranov will be expecting this approach." Morgan's smile contained no humor. "I'm counting on it." "You're using the main infiltration as a diversion," Harrington realized. "What aren't you telling the rest of the team?" Morgan glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "There's a secondary entrance, a drainage tunnel that doesn't appear on any of the official schematics. I'll be using it to access the facility while the main team creates a distraction at the primary entry points." "Alone," Harrington frowned. "That's suicide." "It's necessary," Morgan countered. "Baranov has spent years developing countermeasures against teams like this one. But he's focused on me, on our personal history. That fixation makes him predictable." "And vulnerable," Harrington acknowledged, understanding her strategy. "Exactly." Harrington studied her face, seeing not just the tactical calculation, but the personal stake behind it. "This isn't just about stopping his research, is it? This is about ending things between you two once and for all." "7 years, Michael," Morgan said softly. 7 years of watching him destroy lives, corrupt good people, turn them into weapons against their own country. It has to end." Harrington couldn't argue with that. He'd seen firsthand what Baranov's obsession had cost, not just in American lives, but in the very fabric of trust that held military units together. "Just promise me one thing," he said. "When you find him, remember your training, not your anger. The best revenge isn't killing him, it's bringing him back to face justice for everything he's done." Morgan held his gaze for a long moment. "I'll try," she said finally. "That's all I can promise." It wasn't the answer Harrington had hoped for, but it was honest. And in their world, honesty was often the best you could expect. The infiltration began at 0200 hours under the cover of darkness and a light rain that muffled sound and reduced visibility, perfect conditions for a covert approach. From his position in the command center, Harrington monitored the team's progress through their body cameras and communications. The main force split into 3 elements, approaching the facility from different directions. As anticipated, they encountered resistance security personnel who responded with professional efficiency, but without the deadly precision that would indicate Unit 113 operators. "Something's wrong," Harrington muttered, watching the feeds. "This is too easy." General Howard, overseeing the operation from beside him, raised an eyebrow. "They've already neutralized 12 hostiles. I wouldn't call that easy." "Rent-a-cops," Harrington clarified. "Not Unit 113. Where are Baranov's real operators?" His question was answered moments later when Team 2 reported reaching the facility's main security office. The feed showed what appeared to be the aftermath of a firefight, bodies of security personnel scattered across the floor, killed with clinical precision. "Someone got here before us," the team leader reported, his voice tense with unease. Harrington exchanged a concerned glance with Howard. "Morgan," they said in unison. The infiltration team proceeded deeper into Baranov's facility, encountering occasional resistance from security personnel who appeared to have been left behind as a delaying force. The skirmishes were brief and professional, with the specialized operators quickly neutralizing the threat and continuing their advance. In the command center, tension mounted as the operation progressed without locating either Baronov or significant research materials. The facility appeared to have been systematically stripped of anything valuable, with only non-essential equipment and documentation left behind. Sub-level 2 access secured, the team leader reported. Moving to final area, be advised we're detecting signs of recent activity, footprints in dust doors, left ajar, lights still activated. The infiltration team breached the final secured area, a reinforced section that appeared to have served as both a research archive and a detention facility for test subjects. Unlike the upper levels, this area showed signs of hasty abandonment, papers scattered across desks, equipment left running, personal items discarded in the rush to evacuate. And in the center of the main room, seated calmly at a desk with his hands folded before him, was a man Harrington recognized immediately from Viper Valley, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the bearing of a career military officer. "Baronov," he said in disbelief. "No," Howard replied, studying the feed with narrowed eyes. "That's not Baronov." The silver-haired man smiled faintly, an expression that contained neither surprise nor concern. "I'm afraid there has been a misunderstanding," he replied in perfect English, with only the faintest trace of a Russian accent. "I am not Colonel Baronov." In the command center, Howard activated the direct communication link to the team leader. "Facial recognition to scan," he ordered tersely. "Full biometric now." The data was transmitted in real time to the command center, where advanced systems compared it against known records of Colonel Alexei Baronov. "No match," the system reported after several tense seconds. "Subject is not Baronov male. Subject identified as Petrov, Victor D., former Soviet intelligence, current status unknown." A double, Harrington realized. A decoy designed to make us think we'd captured Baronov. "More than that," Howard added grimly. "A message. Baronov is telling us he anticipated this operation, that he's always one step ahead." On the body camera feed, Petrov continued to smile faintly, apparently amused by the situation despite being surrounded by armed operators. "Colonel Morgan sends her regards," the team leader told him, relaying Morgan's message from her separate infiltration. At the mention of Morgan's name, Petrov's smile widened slightly. "Ah, the indomitable Sarah Mitchell, still hunting after all these years. Please convey my employer's compliments on her persistence. Few adversaries have provided such stimulating opposition." "Where is Baronov?" the team leader demanded. "Gone," Petrov replied simply, "to continue his work in a more secure location. But he left something for Colonel Morgan." "A personal message, you might say." Petrov nodded toward a small safe mounted in the wall behind his desk. "The combination is her date of birth. The real one, not the one in her official files." In the command center, Howard's expression tightened at this casual revelation of how much Baronov knew about Morgan, not just her operational identity, but her actual history, details that should have been buried decades ago when Sarah Mitchell officially ceased to exist. The infiltration team followed protocol, precisely scanning the safe for booby traps before carefully opening it using the combination Morgan had provided. Inside was a single item, a small USB drive in a protective case. "Secure it for transport," Howard ordered. "Full containment protocols. And prepare the subject for extraction as well. We'll want to question him thoroughly once we're back at a secure facility." As the infiltration team completed their mission, Harrington watched with growing concern. There was still no sign of Morgan, no communication from her separate infiltration route. Had Baronov anticipated that too? Was the entire operation a trap designed to eliminate the one person who had consistently thwarted his plans? His fears were allayed 30 minutes later, when Morgan finally made contact, not through the command center's communications network, but via a secure personal channel directly to Harrington's headset. I found his real lab, she reported, her voice tight with controlled fury. Sub-level 3, hidden behind a false wall. The test subjects are here, Michael. 8 of them. Civilians. What he's done to them? She trailed off, and Harrington could hear her fighting to maintain her professional composure. Are they alive? He asked. Barely. I've stabilized them as best I could, but they need immediate medical attention. And there's something else: research, notes, formulas, detailed records of the compound's development over the past decade. Everything we need to understand what he's created and how to counter it. And Baranov, a long pause. Gone, but he left a message, for me specifically. The USB drive, Harrington guessed. No, something more personal. Before she could elaborate, the facility's power grid suddenly failed, plunging the building into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in, bathing the interior in the harsh red glow of backup lighting. Self-destruct sequence, Morgan reported, her voice now urgent. We have 15 minutes to evacuate before the entire complex is reduced to rubble. Baranov doesn't want to leave any evidence behind. The next 15 minutes were a blur of coordinated chaos as the infiltration team raced to evacuate the facility, bringing with them the recovered test subjects, Petrov, and what research materials they could gather in the limited time available. They barely made it out before the first explosions tore through the lower levels of the building, followed by a cascade of detonations that systematically demolished the facility from the inside out. From the safety of their extraction vehicles, they watched as Baranov's research center collapsed in on itself, burying whatever secrets remained. Morgan joined Harrington in the command vehicle, her face streaked with grime and what might have been blood, though not her own. In her hands, she clutched a secure case containing the research data she had recovered. What was the personal message? Harrington asked as they began the journey back to the forward operating base. Morgan reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object, a pocket watch, its silver case tarnished with age. It was my father's, she said quietly. Given to me when I joined the agency. I lost it in Boston during the Unit 113 ambush. She opened the case, revealing an inscription on the inside cover. The game continues. Round 2 begins now, AB. He wants you to know he could have killed you, Harrington observed, that he chose not to. Because this isn't about elimination for him, Morgan replied, closing the watch with a decisive snap. It's about the game, the chase, the intellectual challenge of worthy opponents. And the USB drive, what's on it? We won't know until it's been examined in a secure environment, Morgan replied. Could be research data, could be misinformation, could be nothing but a psychological tactic designed to make us question our security protocols. Or it could be a message, Harrington suggested, something personal from Baranov to you. 7 years is a long time to hunt someone. Relationships form even between adversaries. Morgan considered this possibility, her expression revealing nothing of her inner thoughts. Perhaps, she acknowledged finally. Either way, it's evidence, and every piece of evidence brings us one step closer to ending this. As they continued their journey through the forested roads of Eastern Europe, Harrington found himself reflecting on the nature of the conflict they were engaged in, not the conventional warfare he had trained for, but a more insidious battle fought in shadows and secrets, where victory was measured not in territory gained, but in threats neutralized and lives preserved from harm that most would never know existed. And at the center of this shadow war was a woman who officially didn't exist, a ghost, who moved through the world unseen, hunting those who would weaponize the human mind itself. Olivia Morgan, Sarah Mitchell, the woman who doesn't exist. Whatever names she used, her mission remained the same: to protect those who would never know they had been protected, to fight battles that would never be recorded in official histories. As their vehicle wound through the darkened countryside, Harrington glanced at Morgan seated beside him in contemplative silence. It's not over, is it? He asked, though he already knew the answer. No, she replied simply. It's just beginning. And in that moment, Lieutenant Michael Harrington knew with absolute certainty that his path had changed irrevocably. Viper Valley had been more than a mission gone wrong. It had been an initiation into a world few ever glimpsed, a war fought not with conventional weapons, but with intelligence, deception, and the sheer determination of those who stood against the darkness. Whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited in the continuing hunt for Baranov and his network, Harrington knew he would face them not as the SEAL officer he had been, but as something new, a hunter, a guardian. Perhaps in his own way, a ghost like Morgan herself. and together they would continue the hunt until it reached its final conclusion.